Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we're going to take a look at Mercury's upcoming retrograde in the sign of Leo. I'm going to give you 5 things to watch for, 5 archetypal themes that you may observe during this retrograde period. And then I'm also going to take you back in time to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 previous Mercury retrograde in Leo periods that you could do some historical tracking um, and have a look at in order to maybe draw some correlations with this upcoming retrograde. I always like doing that personally. If you watch my channel for a while, you know this is an exercise that we do with many different transits. Looking at previous cycles can be a really nice way of just alerting ourselves to the presence of a transit that's happening now, and maybe even seeing some connective tissue between one stage or era of our life and another. I always find it to be helpful. So anyway, before we get into it, as always, remember to like and subscribe. It helps our channel grow immensely. I'm out of town on vacation this week, so these episodes are packing a little bit more, a little shorter and sweeter, like packing it in a little tighter time frame for production. And we lost a bunch of content last week, so it's been it's been a very busy month getting caught up with everything. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. When you are over there, check out everything that we're up to under the live events tab. Monthly webinars are posted. You go to the shop page and find all sorts of monthly webinars from the past, masterclass series from the past, and lots of other good stuff there too. So check all of that out. August webinar is on the 7th house. So have more on that when I'm back from vacation. Okay, let's turn our attention to the real-time clock. Today is Thursday, July 17th. Technically, I celebrate my birthday the day before, the day of, and the day after. So you can continue wishing me a happy birthday. No, I'm kidding. Tomorrow, July 18th, Mercury will turn retrograde in the sign of Leo. This retrograde will take place for a while. We're going to see the Cazimi transition between July 31st and August 1st. And then after that, Mercury will station pretty close to an opposition to Pluto. You're not seeing that here, but that will happen. Stations around August 11th, turns direct around August 12th. So yeah, it's always around 3 weeks. And then Mercury will remain in Leo in direct motion all the way until September 2nd. Maybe, is it? Yeah, it's probably about September 2nd. So the rest of this summer, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or winter, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, we have Mercury traveling through the sign of Leo. But what does that mean? What does the retrograde mean? And then I'm going to take you through some historic cycles for tracking of previous Mercury retrogrades in Leo. I think some of them are probably going to be more dynamic than others, and I'll tell you why. But anyhow, 5 things to watch for first. This is a Mercury retrograde in the sign of Leo. Now, one thing that in the sign of the sun, Leo being the sign of the sun, one thing that is consistent with all retrograde cycles is they describe a process. There's not just one thing that happens. There's usually a process and a story that unfolds that you can watch from the time that the planet turns retrograde all the way until the time it turns direct. Some people will track through its shadow. Some people will track all the way direct, forward, retrograde, and forward again through the entire sign of Leo. There's not one right or wrong way of tracking, but typically with any retrograde, especially the faster moving ones like Venus and Mercury or even Mars, you want to track the whole sign house location. So we're going to be doing horoscopes tomorrow. And in those horoscopes, we'll remind you of the topics of the house that Mercury is retrograding in while in Leo. So that will be helpful. But otherwise, remember that it's really a story that's unfolding, and some journaling, some tracking of that is going to be necessary to really get the most out of the astrological symbolism. So in other words, between now and about the middle of August, I recommend paying attention to the things I'm about to list, not just this weekend. Now, these things are also, it's one thing that's important to note before I go into it. All Mercury retrogrades can be thought of as a process of deconstruction and reconstruction, especially of our mind, our perceptions, concepts and ideas, sometimes uses of technology or organizational strategies, organizational paradigms almost get reconfigured. Could be something as simple as how you organize the drawers in your closet. Literally, that's happened to me before. with a with a Mercury retrograde. But Mercury is a psychopomp, which means a guide of the soul. Psyche being the word for soul. So the guide of the soul in Hermes Mercury and the retrogradation process will constitute several times a year little turning points where our understanding and how we're being guided along the path of life spiritually goes through a little shift, a shift of perception, a shift of understanding, a shift that comes through as a kind of learning or a processing of information and new ideas being distilled from that process, a reorientation again of strategies, organizational structures in our lives, quite common for Mercury retrogrades. But the deeper alchemy of Mercury retrograde is to shift our mind as our soul continues to evolve. Put it that simply. You could think of the mind as an interesting matrix that exists from our gut to our brain. So it's pretty, it can be very multifaceted, it can be very physical, very embodied, but also, and quite frequently, very mental, intellectual, ideological, rooted in ideas and thoughts and concepts and perceptions. On that note, we have a Mercury retrograde in the sign of the sun, the sign of the lion, a fire sign. So these are the 5 things that I would watch for over the course of the next 3 to 4 weeks. Number 1 is storylines. The sun, the shape of its arc every day is it rises. This rising and appearing is metaphorically connected to birth and beginnings. It rises up to the peak of the sky, which is like the course of life taking us into adulthood and external participation in the world and individuation. And then it takes us to setting, which is old age and death. The course of the sun was connected intimately for ancient astrologers as an astrological symbol to the plot line of an entire life, which is why it has sometimes been described as a universal significator. Universal significator means the symbol has the power in astrology to convey something about the entirety of the life, the plot line of the life, the ambitions, the sense of direction, the desires that take us through the arc of life. I remember in grad school in creative writing learning about, that the very basic diagram on the board of the plot line of a movie, film, play, novel, what have you. Looks like the arc of the sun. And so when Mercury turns retrograde in the sign of Leo, a very basic thing that can happen is that subtle or gross, small or big, plot lines in our lives can go through reorientation. It is very much like a transit to the sun in your birth chart, where those transits often coincide with a repurposing or a redirection of life's purpose, a new sense of ambitions and desires that are shaping the arc of our life's path on the biggest level. However, this can also take place within specific areas of life. There's not just one plot line. There's many. There's a plot line that has something to do with your budgeting and your financing and your material assets and resources, or your health and your body, or your sex life, or your love life, or your kids, or your role as a parent, or your relationship with your dog, or your developing beliefs, your learning with a teacher, your career, your responsibility in the workplace, right? There are so many arenas of life within which a plot line can shift or subtly change, or change in really big ways, all of which are appropriate for a Mercury retrograde in the sign of the sun. Mercury's retrograde is therefore reorienting the narrative trajectory within a specific area of life. We will refine what we're saying right now by looking at horoscopes tomorrow, where we can plug it into a house. It is typically the house in the chart that will tell us that set of topics that Mercury's retrograde is addressing. So in this case, life purpose, if it was retrograde in your 7th or your 10th, relationships or career, for example. So we can narrow in on and focus a little bit more that way, but watch for storylines changing. These aren't just storylines that are changing. Storylines tend to have they take us forward into the future. And so when a storyline changes, one way of recognizing it is just that I feel like I'm going in a new direction, or there's a new path, or there's a new goal, or there's a new desire that is reshifting my sense of direction and purpose in some specific area. Number 2, voice and visibility. The sign of the sun is a sign that pertains to that centrifugal, expressive, life-giving force. The sun often called spirit, that living, vibrant presence of the eternal being that is in us, that moves from body to body, lifetime to lifetime. You can feel dead even though you're an eternal being. One of the reasons that you end up feeling dead even though you're eternally alive is because the way you're living your life doesn't put you in touch with that vital living spirit. It doesn't put you in touch with your pure, vibrant, living consciousness, the participatory, animate part of your being. Leo is a sign as the sun sign that is often connected to this feeling of being alive, having a centrifugal force, being in touch with my vibrant, living life force or spirit, what feels like inner authenticity or some sense of like vibrant, what do I want to call it? Like there's a sunshine that lives in us. You know what it's like when you're in touch with it. You just feel radiant. So for Mercury retrograde in Leo, a lot of questions will come up over the voice and the expression of that living spirit, whether it's literally through our voice, through singing, through writing, through speaking, through communicating, through what we say or how we're saying it to certain people in different areas of our life. And also whether or not we feel validated or somehow seen or visible enough or to the right degree or in the right way. So things like authenticity of voice, visibility, validation, a feeling of being in touch with our living spirit. Very important. And revisions or a process of refining or shifting in order to make sure that we feel seen and heard. That can be important. Now, when I say seen and heard, I don't necessarily mean some big, grandiose, egotistical thing. I just mean, so it could be something as simple as, do I like the way that I'm communicating with people? Is there something about it that could shift subtly that might actually lead me to feeling better about the way I convey myself? I don't necessarily see that as like, authenticate me, It's like, just what are the subtle adjustments we can make so that we feel like we're in touch with that living force and the way we're seen and the way we present ourselves. And now sometimes that might boil down to like, I feel exhausted. And so in order to feel alive and present and for my life force to be, communicated and seen and heard, I need to take better care of myself. So it could be anything connected to the sense of vibrant voice and visibility. Number 3 would be leadership, authority, and solar figures. Shifts or changes can happen in leaders, authority figures, solar figures like fathers around us. If you're married, it could be the spouse and the role he plays as a dad, for example. But it could also be your boss at work or you yourself and how you convey or convey a degree of authority or responsibility, how you carry a role of leadership. What is that and how and why? Anything pertaining to shifts of leadership, authority, responsibility, the sun as a central figure of authority that has some sacred mission or purpose that's bigger than itself. And then that sense, it serves something bigger than itself. Things like this they become important considerations of a Mercury retrograde in Leo. Number 4 would be thoughts of the heart. I take this phrase from a book by James Hillman called The Thought. Oh my God. The Thought of the Heart. What is it called? Now I'm going to look it up because I can't believe let's see, what is it called? It is called The Thought of the Heart and the Soul of the World. It's one of my favorite titles, but I completely just spaced on it. Anyway, this phrase is taken from that book. Check it out if you want to read a really good book, Thought of the Heart and Soul of the World. To me, there's within each of us, there's like a little inner temple. And it's sort of mysterious how you ever gain access to this place, because for most of us, I think we find it through something. We find it through love and romance or creativity or a passion, or we find it through a trauma sometimes or suffering. But all of a sudden we find there's this sacred inner space and there's a little fire lit in there. And there's a wise voice in that temple. And that's our heart space. And you know what it took to get there. You know what it took to access that place. And probably you know what kinds of things you have to do to somehow get back into that space. It doesn't just open instantly. It usually takes a little coaxing, meditation, prayer, walking, maybe taking care of our bodies, being with the right people. And then all of a sudden that door opens and that fire is present and that wisdom is there. That's the heart space, at least as I've come to understand it. I'm circumambulating it with words. Mercury retrograde in Leo says there's something important you need to know. And it has to do with getting into that space in order to hear what needs to be said. I think Mercury in Leo is like, it's retrograde in that sign, has something to do with conveying something that can only be conveyed through the heart. And this wisdom or information has something for you, and it may give you instructions or guidance or reassurance or courage or creative instructions or original ideas, whatever it has to give you. I don't know, but I have a feeling for some people, this retrograde in Leo will be about finding our way back into that space. Maybe it's been a while since we've been there. Illuminating the mind, we have Mercury, Hermes, philosopher, guide of the soul, in the sign of the sun. And the sun was the planet that rejoiced in the ninth house, the place of higher wisdom. And so Mercury's retrograde in Leo quite literally can be about illuminating higher wisdom and understanding. Don't typically think about Leo that way because everyone unfortunately conflates Leo with the fifth house, which is not a traditional way of understanding the fifth house or Leo. Anyway, what's really important is that we have a philosopher in Hermes in the sign of the sun that was associated with enlightenment and illumination. A lot of people don't really think about Leo as a sign of great intellectual power or even great spiritual knowledge. Again, people tend to think of Leo as like a showman or a showboater or someone who likes center stage or maybe like a king or something, queen. But actually, when it comes to understanding things that are of transcendent, eternal value, getting close to the source, understanding the thoughts in the mind of God and the universe, these were all considered solar things for ancient philosophers. And so Hermes, in any fire sign, through its triplicity association with the sun, but also in Leo especially, can be about those fiery, burning bush-like moments. So you take your sandals off, there's something heating up, and you're getting some glimpses at things that are holy or sacred. So don't be surprised if this Mercury retrograde in the sign of the sun has some pretty illuminating things to share or show. And then I wouldn't be surprised if those insights affect storylines, ambitions, directions, intentions, things like voice and visibility, leadership and authority, and so forth. So a couple different things to consider here today. Now let's go back in time. I'm going to show you some Mercury retrograde cycles in Leo that you can track going back quite some time. We're going to go all the way back to 2005 as the first one. Now, if I go back just a little bit here, you're going to notice that Mercury turns retrograde in the sign of Leo at about the 20th degree, pretty close-ish to where it's turning retrograde now in July of 2005. July of 2005, that retrograde extends. We got a Cazimi in Leo taking place around August 6th. Transition, stations turns retrograde back to August 17th. So that's a parallel period from 2005 that you could track in the whole sign house of Leo. That happens to be my fourth house. Let me turn the wheel and I'll show you how my tracking worked. So all of these take place. I'm a Taurus rising, so whole sign fourth house. Here it is. And what I found this to be so interesting. It was at this time that I moved on from out of my father's and mother's cottage, like a cabin that they had built for retirement. And it was right next to my grandpa's place on some land in rural Michigan. And I moved out of that home after finishing the first draft of a book that was about my father, my grandfather, family karma. After finishing a draft of that book, I moved on to campus for the final year of my master's degree. And so at that time was literally packing up my belongings and moving. It's a fourth house dynamic, pretty simple, couple of really interesting themes. Go back to 2005, that summer, July, August. What was happening in that whole sign house of Leo? What was the process? maybe use some of the 5 things to watch for that I gave you as guidelines for what might have been taking place between that late July and August period. I'm going to take you forward to another, which is, 2011. Oh my gosh, if I could go by 2000. Oh, I still keep doing months. Let's go to years. All right, here we go. Now, I'm going to go backward in time just a touch. And I want you to notice that Mercury is going to station and turn retrograde at the very beginning of Virgo, around the beginning of August 2011. But most of the retrograde takes place in Leo throughout August. See that taking place, and then Mercury stations and turns direct by late August, and then enters Virgo by early September. What I find really interesting about that is that I was connecting with, this is in the 4th house again for me. So that retrograde period, let me just go back a little bit. Here it is in my 4th house again, summer of 2011. I had just started dating my wife, and we were starting what would become a move for me down to DC to start a home-based yoga studio. The precursor for that event took place as we reconnected here at the end of the summer. And it was really, to me, what was really interesting about that is that this process foreshadowed a move that would come some months later, but that was being planned for at this time. Isn't that interesting? So it doesn't necessarily have to be that the move takes place during the retrograde in the 4th house, or that you can't see the seeds of something that's going to change being planted during a retrograde that then come to pass maybe soon after. So there's a broad way in which we can track this symbolism. Now, in the summer of 2012, 1 year later, we have another period that conveys some of Mercury's retrograde in Leo again. So here you can see this is about July of 2012. Mercury stations, turns retrograde, heads back through the sign of Leo, and then finishes up its retrograde in Leo by early August, and then moves forward again. And it's not going to fully go into the sign of Virgo until September. Okay, so let me move this back just a little bit so I can get the retrograde in. So that retrograde, again, you could track that. Look at the whole sign house of Leo. Now we're going to do horoscopes tomorrow. So if you don't know that house, it'll be a part of tomorrow's session, and you could write these dates down and then take a look at them tomorrow. So during the summer of 2012, we had moved into the yoga studio space. We rented a home together, moved in together, and then took over ownership. We had one more business partner who moved during this period, relocated, and the entirety of the business then fell to my wife and I, who then began visioning a move of the studio and a departure from living at the studio to living on our own for 1 year following. So again, during this time, we were making plans for a move that happened a year later, and we were inheriting this business, which was located in a home we had moved into, the plans for which were laid during the year previous Mercury retrograde in my 4th house. And now we're planning to relocate the studio after our lease of this house is up. We had a 2-year lease. We started the business in the house. We knew that the following summer it was up, so we started planning. And this new studio will be a commercial space, and we'll live in a separate space and move in together because we're starting to plan for a family and marriage. Pretty amazing how that, so again, the retrograde, not anything substantive happened with respect to starting a family or with respect to moving, but we laid the groundwork for those things. And that happened because we had a business partner that left, leaving us the business and the lease and everything on our own. So pretty, to me, just remarkable. Let's go to 2018. So if I move to summer of 2018, we're going to see that Mercury is retrograde once more in late July. And then its retrograde takes it all the way through mid to late August. And then it's forward motion again into September. Familiar pattern. So summer of 2018, during this window of time, my second daughter was born, and we began laying the groundwork for moving our business online and closing the commercial space down, which ended up happening the following year. Another year out plan we started making around the birth of a child, very fourth house family planning, and continuing to emphasize the development and cultivation of our family life as something separate or apart from business, which is a normal part of the 4th, 10th house binary. There are other transits that were happening along this timeline, which I've showed you through other techniques. So it's funny to see how there are different astrological cycles that can actually nicely mirror the same storylines in our lives. I had Jupiter-Saturn dynamics playing out around some of these times that were really interesting as well. Come forward to summer of 2024. Last year, just for a little bit, we got, here we are. Let's go to the Mercury retrograde here. Started off in early Virgo, tips back into late Leo. This was really in, beginning of August last year. And that retrograde through Leo was in the late part of Leo and is really kind of August into September, around that time. So what I found super interesting about that, the only thing that I could map out from last summer that felt very clearly connected to the 4th house topics in my chart was the development of a music room, kind of a music and art room in our house. We had just this random room that was, I guess it's supposed to be like a guest room. It's in the basement. And we were like using it for yoga. And then we decided we're going to turn it into a music room. So we painted it. And during that retrograde period, we took out the carpet and put in some basic like hardwood flooring, got a carpet for it, put our instruments in there, like painted the walls, put up some fun Grateful Dead artwork. And it was a repurposing of a place in the house for creative expression. And perhaps that's a little bit of the Mercury retrograde in Leo. Who knows what this one will bring? They've been, those 4th house retrogrades have coincided with movements in home and family for me, because it's been in my 4th house. Where has it been for you? What have you learned? What have you seen? Drop us your story in the comments section. Illuminate us with your insights. It would be really nice to hear from all of you. And I will be back tomorrow for Mercury retrograde horoscopes in Leo. We'll take it through all 12 signs and give you a reminder of those topical areas. And I will actually use the 5 things to watch for as prompts. I also have some sacred images that I'm going to use to help you tap into it. All right, that's it. Take it easy. Bye.